So the Canadian election is over a year away, but I thought we'd look at it already. A year and 2 months out from the election, 14 months away. And how topical that we look at it at this time, because 1 year ago the gap in the polls was 4 points. It's now 18. It's been an absolutely incredible year for the Conservatives. And we can look at the recent polls. I mean, at the start of July, 15 points, 20 points, 22 points from good grade pollsters. It's just absolutely incredible. And it's not a question of will Conservatives win. As you can see here, it's a question of how big their win's going to be. 214 seats, which is the most since 1958, when there were less seats available. It's actually more than that. It would be the biggest win for the government in history, not the biggest margin in terms of difference in seats, because there were less seats at this time. So not the biggest margin, but it will be the most ever seats in a government. And we go back to the list of prime ministers. We look at the likelihood of a Liberal win, even if we know it's not going to happen, is further compounded, because the last time a Prime Minister of Canada won 4 elections in their term, it was Wilfrid Laurier in 1911, or 1908 was the last election he won. It's only happened one other time, and that was for the Conservative John A. Macdonald. So really, it's not all too likely that Trudeau is going to last another term anyway. There are no term limits in Canada, but he will not be making it to a 4th term. So we now look at the map, and it gets even worse for the Liberals, because out of these 67 seats, you'd think, okay, you'd hold on to the cities and the metropolitan areas because they're going to be the most liberal thinking. It's really not going that way. They're holding on to rural areas, which really, if you're holding on to the cities, there are obviously more seats available in the cities, so you're winning more seats. But they're holding on to these big districts that really are worth 1 seat, whereas clearly they're winning Winnipeg still. That's 4 seats right there. So really a bleak outlook, because they're losing the metropolitan areas, which is where you'd think they do the best. Even the New Democrats are really struggling in the metropolitan areas. As you can see, just Conservative wipeout in Toronto. Hamilton is split between Conservatives and New Democrats. You've got Kitchener, that's also split between Greens and Conservative. Just such a variety in that city. And Quebec, even the home of Trudeau, they are Montreal, Quebec. This is the only area they're holding on to. Really, the only metropolitan area they're holding on to. I guess Ottawa as well. They've got a majority down there. But really, just really bad for the Liberal government, and they're really going to have to rebuild. And that probably 9 times out of 10, that means the leader departs. So this is probably the last we see of Trudeau as leader. As you can see, Edmonton, another area where it's all gone blue, and these are just leaking Liberal seats. It's so bad. It's so bad for Liberals, and it's identical to the Conservatives and Labour in the UK. It is just an absolute wipeout. And the question is it a move to the right, or is it a rejection of the left? This is the question that keeps getting asked in Canada. It got asked a lot in the UK, and it's brought up to devalue the Labour win. Is saying, look, 80% of the country didn't vote for you, so how does that legitimise your government? And the same could be asked of the Conservatives, although 4 out of 10 people think that Poilievre is the right person to lead the country. So really, it's difficult to understand the next election that comes around. It could go either way. It could go any way. But as we can see in the polls, the PPC really have not gone anywhere. If anything, they've decreased in their numbers. So really, is Canada staying more central? Is, as we can see, the New Democrats have not really improved. It just seems like Canada still is in the centre, and it's not left, it's not right. You feel like the UK is moving right, even though Labour won and they're allegedly a left-wing government. The rest of Europe is moving right, but Canada seems to be centre. Of course, Canada in a different realm of influence, but still a Western power. But Canada again seems to just be remaining non-partisan. It will flip between conservative and liberal, and that's about it. There's not really any strong opinions there. The closest to a far right party is at 3 or 2%. So, and the closest to a far left party is at 4. So really, there's no major shift in Canadian thinking at the moment. They're really just deciding to reject the Liberals now, which is completely fair enough, and it's time for the Conservatives to have a go. Then the Conservatives in 8, 10, 12, 15 years will fail, and the Liberals will come back in, and it will be the same process again. It's just like the UK. We are the same, really. So this is the 2021 map. I did want to look at this because I think it is just really interesting to look at the contrast. And as you can see, obviously these areas, these northern areas, are worth 1 seat, even though they are so massive. But we can ignore them because they're worth 1 seat. And if we actually look into the metropolitan areas and stuff like that, Toronto, completely red. Once again, it's the metropolitan area, so you tend to have more liberal thinking. But if we go down to Toronto now, it's split between the blues and the reds, and you still have New Democrats holding on to a couple of seats in there. So they've lost Toronto, essentially. They've lost most of Toronto. You're going to keep Quebec, or Montreal rather, because it's, first of all, it's Quebec, so you're only going to lose seats to, the name escapes me, my goodness, Bloc Quebecois. I do apologise if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, which I'm not. So, but you're never going to lose to the Conservatives there, really. You're only going to lose to them. And right now, in Montreal, you're holding on. So, fine, you keep Montreal, whatever. Winnipeg, that's the other one you're holding on to right now. Vancouver, we can have a look at Vancouver. If we go over to the other side of the country, how is Vancouver getting on? You're losing Vancouver. That's how this is going. So you've got 3 seats in Vancouver now, when you had, what were we at? I mean, just look at it. You were at what is that? A dozen seats in Vancouver, and now you're at 3. It's just shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And come election day, will it close back up again? Yeah, probably, because that's how it always tends to go in elections. But you're losing bad, and it's going to be a rebuild. It's just like the Conservatives in the UK. It's going to be a long rebuild, and in the major metropolitan areas like Toronto, like Vancouver, where you're losing 10, Toronto could be 15, 20 seats. It's just going to take a massive effort to rebuild this, going from 160 seats to 67, and letting the Conservatives go from 110 or 119 to 214, gain 100. Your parliament is 338, and you're letting them gain 100. It's absolutely insane. And I saw a statistic that said something like 7 in 10 Canadians are not even considering voting Liberal. So your ceiling is 30%, and that's if you absolutely nail it and you get everyone on board that you can, because right now you're not even being considered by 70% of people. So really, again, just the Liberals have got a long way to go to come back from here. They've held government. They continue to blame issues on the old government, which is from 2015. They're just melting down right now, and it's time for change in Canada. Conservatives are ready to take the reins, and we'll just see how it goes. It's just the same cycle, unfortunately. I've come to accept it in the UK as well. It's just the same. You're just going to flip-flop between Conservative and Labour / Liberal, and you're never going to get anywhere. and the other party's always going to look right because it's easier to criticise than to put into action. So we'll see how the Conservatives get on. Now it's saying 206 seats, so I don't think it makes that much of a difference, really, to be honest. But just an incredible turnaround again. Bloc Quebecois. I don't know. I really struggle with French. Okay, I do try. But they're set to remain at 32 seats. No, well, allegedly 39 on here, but I saw another poll that said 32. So really, it's hard to tell. In bigger elections, like in the US, it's kind of easier to tell because you get across a whole state, you can kind of get a better view of how it is. But in a smaller area, you really people can change. People that are undecided can be more important in there. So really 39, 32, whatever it is on election day, it could be anywhere between there. So we will see the PPC again, 0 seats, just not good enough. And I've been comparing it to the UK throughout. The bloc, as I'll now call them, it's essentially the SNP to some degree. PPC is your UKIP. If you're British watching this, this is kind of summing it up. The the Democrats are the Liberal Democrats. So it's the exact same as the UK. Obviously, we brought in this system to Canada, but they seem to have introduced the same political system. So even without the Labour Party being created, I don't think at this point. So really, it's just a massive disaster for the Liberals, and they're going to have the next 10 years, the Conservatives will have the next 10 years, and then it will just head on back to the Liberals, and it will be the same process until the end of time. Greens as well, holding on to 2 seats. So good for them, really, in the projection. I think they hold on to 2 seats, yeah. So no change for them. But anyway, Canada, just wanted to give a quick update because we're still, it's hard to really give any sort of definitive conclusions out of all of these apart from the metropolitan areas because you're so far away. You don't know how it's going to end up. The Conservatives could completely implode for whatever reason, and it could become a close race again somehow, or it could get even further away, as the trends are suggesting on the polls. So really, again, hard to make conclusions. Bloc Quebecois? I will find out how to say it after this video, and then next time we come to Canada, I will make sure I'm saying it right. But they're going to stay pretty much the same. Obviously, they're kind of restricted to the Quebec area. And that's about it. I don't really see much changing in the next 12 months, to be honest. That's the conclusion I can make now, is maybe if these Met areas start to turn back, then sure, but they're the most affected by the crime and just all the issues in Canada at the moment. It's just an absolute mess. So we'll see, but certainly looking forward to more on Canada as it breaks within the next 14 months.